Video bites from ulearn.photography. Here's our principal, Simon Q. Walden.
Hello, and in this video bite I'm going to give you 6 steps that you do every time you're about to shoot in the studio. And it's all about a routine that prevents you from making silly mistakes because your camera is not set right. This is it's particularly important if you often mix studio and location work, because if you tend to be just in the studio day in, day out, you're unlikely to make many changes to those settings. It's just the very nature of studio work. But if you particularly, you're in and out of the studio, sometimes location, sometimes studio, really kind of get this nailed down. So for me, when I pick up the camera for a studio shoot, these are the 6 things I check. 1, I set my ISO to 400, that's my standard ISO in the studio. 2, I set the white balance to flash because I'm in the studio, I'm using flash. 3, I set the picture style to neutral. That's the picture style that's applied to the saved JPEG file because I want to be in control of any effects or treatments added to the picture. 4, for me, I set JPEG capture only in the studio. I don't shoot RAW files in the studio. It's a workflow issue. I'll come back to that. 5, I set the shutter speed to 1/125th of a second. That happens to be the sync speed of my camera and remote trigger. My camera will actually sync slightly faster than my remote trigger does. And then finally, number 6 is the aperture, but here I'm shooting in manual mode. I'm adjusting the aperture to taste depending on what I want to achieve in the particular picture. Now, why no RAW file? Why no RAW in the studio? Okay, as I mentioned, this is basically, it's partly workflow and partly just I have no need for it. In a typical week in the studio, we may shoot anywhere between 1,000 to maybe 10,000 frames during the week. Now, if we had to deal with those all as RAW files, a whole workflow would just grind to a halt. Flow would not be the word that you would apply to it. JPEGs, we're in control of the exposure. We've got no need for any exposure latitude because we're shooting in the studio. The final delivery will be based on a JPEG, whether it's as a digital image or as a print. Either way around, our final delivery will be a JPEG. JPEG is more than good enough for our purposes. So anyway, those 6 things. Develop your own routine. You might have particular settings that you always use. The whole point is it should be a routine. You routinely do it. You pick the camera up, you check those 6 settings or your 7 settings or your 5 settings, whatever it's going to be for you. That way it's going to prevent you making stupid mistakes and discovering you've just shot an entire shoot with, say, a white balance set to tungsten instead of to flash or some other equally disastrous cock-up.
Subscribe now for regular tips and updates. To find out more, go to ulearn.photography.